Welcome back to the Ed Show. We have some unlikely news tonight. A Republican is actually telling the truth about voter ID laws. Since 2011, 20 states have enacted or attempted to enact voter suppression laws. Half of them passed voter ID laws, well, including the swing state of Pennsylvania. On Saturday, Pennsylvania House Republican Mike Teresi let the cat out of the bag on his state's voter ID law. He gave away the playbook Republicans are using around the country to take back the White House.
We are focused on making sure that we meet our obligations that we've talked about for years. Pro-Second Amendment, the Castle Doctrine's done. First pro-life legislation, abortion facility regulations in 22 years, done. Voter ID, which is going to allow Governor Romney to win the state of Pennsylvania, done.
Well, does that prove what we've known all along? Voter ID laws are nothing but a Republican plot to suppress Democratic votes so they can gain power. Let's bring in Elise Hogue and also Ari Melber, The Nation magazine, and Republican strategist Susan Del Percio, who's happy I didn't identify her as a Democratic strategist as I did the last time. All right. Elise, Republicans claim that voter ID is to prevent fraud. And it has been proven it's just not widespread. There are just sprinklings of these events that take place. Does what he just said really put a hole in his entire argument?
Absolutely. I think it puts a hole, but it doesn't put the absolute hole. What we have to understand, Ed, is that the Republican Party, Susan's Republican Party, actually not only wants to help Romney win this election, but fundamentally, they are actually in opposition to Thomas Jefferson's Declaration of Independence, where all men are created equally. In my home state of Texas, the Republican platform now actually advocates repealing the Voters' Rights Act. This is a group of people that fundamentally believe not all Americans have the right to vote, and they have
Susan,
to stop.
what about that?
Well, it's not true. First of all, there's a lot of Republicans that believe that everyone should have the right to vote. I don't know what this man was doing when he said that. Frankly, it was not the wisest thing that he could do politically. It's almost as ridiculous as the, conspiracy theory that Nancy Pelosi says that the reason ICE is going after Fast and Furious is because it's all about voter ID and the relationship.
Well, he has done a good job on voter suppression.
But it's not about that. And, there's a lot of states out there right now who are saying there's nothing wrong with requiring ID. You have to have ID to take out a library book. Now, I realize the one in Pennsylvania that we're talking about, the idea of having a photo ID that has to be current or has to have an expiration date, that does seem like
Ari,
going
what's
too
the
far.
mission?
I think the big issue here, and the reason why this is bigger than a political gaffe, is when the Supreme Court said that voter ID was okay in 2008, they said that it was only okay if the main goal was not partisan. It was only okay if you were
So
not...
does that soundbite violate the law?
What it does is give people who want to challenge these laws another hook. That particular time in 2008 was about Indiana. And even though it was a party line vote, they said it looked like there were many reasons and it would be okay if partisanship was but one. Here, when you have a leader of a party saying this law is to elect
and it's going to deliver Romney,
that is a legal problem now.
And look, Ed, you've got Michigan on the precipice of passing a similar law which would disenfranchise hundreds of thousands of voters. We're looking at a party where the ends justify the means. This is positively anti-American.
Susan, 7 out of 20 voter suppression states happen to be swing states. Coincidence?
Well, let's face it, there is, clearly there is politics, and there was politics in the decision that Ari just mentioned, so it goes throughout. But at the end of the day, things need to be, I agree, more reasonable. But at the same time, there's nothing wrong with having that law.
Are you saying the Republicans have gone too far on the voter ID?
I think in certain circumstances, yes, they have. Again, like I said, the expiration date on photo IDs, that's going too far. Or having another solution where the Republicans made their biggest mistake was not doing some kind of sample or some type of audit to show that there is cause for concern and then implement
Well,
this.
if I could briefly say, on the cause for concern, the Supreme Court, which conservatively upheld the voter ID law, said in that case they had no evidence of voter fraud in Indiana. Think about that. All this work, all this
Has there been evidence of voter fraud in Pennsylvania?
They haven't been able to prove it, no.
Absolutely not. And actually, one of the things that you have to understand is this man can say this and get away with it because there's been no penalty. Americans for Prosperity, Koch-funded front group, absolutely proven to be providing misinformation to voters about when they're supposed to show up to the polls, they're still out there acting like a legitimate political group. We've got to expose their agenda.
Eric Holder looking at a contempt vote in the House on Thursday. Is it all about voter suppression, or is it all about Fast and Furious?
I think it's that they see him as one of the few people who can uphold the law in support of American voters.
All right, what do you think?
Stop him.
I don't see a direct link to voter suppression, but I don't see a real case. If you look at the history here, I don't see a real case for trying to get the documents that were only about responding to Congress. They are on really thin ice, and I think they're in danger.
Susan,
it is about Fast and Furious.
It is about Fast and Furious. Will Democrats support the contempt vote?
I think they're very concerned. That's why they started negotiating again today, because they say up to 30 Democrats are going to come over and vote for that contempt charge. That will be very damning for the Democrats and the president.
And that may tell you something about gun politics, but all that would happen with contempt is it would go to the D.C. courts. It would take longer than the election to get resolved. This is theater.
To have it be deemed bipartisan is huge in this political charged environment. There's nothing that gets done bipartisan. If you can say there's a contempt charge against the Attorney General, politically, I understand.
Susan,
I am not a lawyer. I don't play one on TV. But I can tell you that politically, this would be a mistake.
I will tell you briefly, I worked on the Hill. Everyone knows when the NRA says jump, there are bipartisan answers. That doesn't solve it.
Elise Hogue, Ari Melber, Susan Del Percio, great to have you with us tonight. Thanks so much. Coming up, he's one of the most influential performing artists of our time. Next, singer Mark Anthony will join me and explain why he's supporting President Obama. Stay tuned.